Next to him, yes.
Can I know what they're doing.
Next to him, I have Max Planck, who is a co-founder of Oculus Story Studio. As I'm sure you're familiar, they have created Lost and most recently Henry. Again, really pushing the boundaries of what's possible and what the future will be like in VR with this kind of content, hopefully. Adjacent to him is Neville Spiteri, CEO of WEVR. Again, both content creators and also, most recently, Transport, looking to build a platform for this new type of content. So thank you. And last but not least, Rob Bredow, CTO of Lucasfilm and part of ILMxLAB. They've actually just unveiled an awesome new Star Wars VR experience at this show. I hope everybody gets a chance to check it out. But yes, thank you for joining us. All right, and now I guess we just jump right in. So I think it'd be good to kind of start with just getting kind of, before we go too far in the future, kind of some perspectives of, this is the year of VR. There's a lot of devices launching. What do you guys expect to see, throughout this year? Eric, you want to kick us off?
It's hard for me to know. I mean, there's so many new headsets coming out, and for us, it's just kind of having our nose to the grindstone and trying to create as much content and as good a content as we can. I think, especially for the smartphones that are in so many billions of people's pockets out there, I'm really eager to see how big of a market we get in this first sort of 12 months or so.
Yeah, I'm excited for VR in general. I'm a content maker. I love Oculus. I love being part of what they're doing, of what we're doing. But I think that this year, we say this is the year of VR, and I believe it, but I also think it's going to be, the beachhead of VR is going to be game players. People who are going to go through the early adoption headache are going to be those people who love games and are willing to learn this new medium. And one thing we believe at Story Studio is that beyond that first beachhead, virtual reality has the potential to be a billion-person art form. That people who don't play games can love virtual reality in certain experiences. And I think storytelling has the capability to expand beyond that beachhead.
Yeah, I would definitely see, gamers are fantastic for that reason, right? There's just such a huge concentration. They're always eager for the next big thing because if you look at the last, 12 or 15 years of the game industry, it's just breakthrough after breakthrough after breakthrough, and now we have amazing titles out there, and all these tools become fundamental for crafting these initial VR experiences, and you have that sort of initial built-in audience. But clearly, all of you, respectively, have filmic backgrounds too, so it's fun to see VR also being that conduit of convergence amongst all the industries, really. I'm curious, Neville, from your perspective.
Yeah, so we were fortunate enough to kind of start in the VR wave a couple of years back in sort of 2014, which seems like ages ago now. And the mix of the company is sort of a combination of game folks and film folks and people who have done a bunch of stuff on the web. And it is really interesting to see how VR is, even though it is starting out initially as a kind of primarily focused around gaming, it's very, very quickly expanding to non-gaming audiences and non-gaming creators. And we very much think of sort of 2016 being year one of VR. There'll be for the first time you'll have, headsets in market that can deliver a consumer experience that's really compelling. And we're just so jazzed to see not only people who wear a headset coming away with okay, this is mind-blowing, I really love this, I want to consume this. We're seeing such an amazing response from the creative community, storytellers, musicians, writers, designers, directors, videographers, photographers that are ignited, and immediately their response is not only do they want to consume VR, they want to make VR. They want to figure out how they can express themselves in this new medium. So
yeah, that was when we went to Sundance. We went to Sundance and did an installation called Holo Cinema, which was projecting stereo pixels on multiple surfaces, like you may have seen done in caves before. And we just put people through with 3D glasses to let them walk into, in our case, we used Jakku, and we had C3PO and BB-8 roll out into the world with you. And because we projected on multiple surfaces, multiple walls and the ground, and we knew where you were standing, we could make a perspective correct version of the world that you could walk in, and you were just wearing glasses like this. And our goal with that was exactly what you were just talking about. Well, hopefully blow people's minds with like where we might be able to go when you can actually make the holodeck, and whether that's in VR or AR or some custom installation like this. But also connecting, we were there to connect with creatives in the space who are interested in immersive entertainment of all these different kind of flavors, and to look for stories that are best told or can only be told in this medium. To me, it's a lot of people ask, is this going to replace films or is this going to replace games? And my answer is always no. I mean, Blu-ray didn't even replace films, right? Blu-ray didn't replace going to the theater. And I don't think there's any way that VR will. I think there's stories that are best told in immersive media, and we want to look for those stories, look for those creatives who want to work that way.
Yeah, that reminds me of often I'm sure we're all asked similar questions, is like, why are so many people excited about VR? And usually this is from people who haven't put the headset on, which, hey, by the way, show of hands, everybody, are you all fans of VR? You've had VR experiences? Okay, good. Just in case we had some hecklers in the audience or something, right? But from my perspective, my background is all game development. I got started like Gears of War 1 and 2 and all kinds of stuff way back when. And I found myself getting a bit of fatigue because, if you look at the hardware has gotten fast enough and we've learned a lot, the AI is more sophisticated, all that kind of stuff, that a lot of the initial magic when kilobytes of memory still mattered are kind of gone now. And then VR came and like smacked that right in the face, right? And then the performance considerations and things like transparency become difficult. Do you go forward? Do you defer? Like there's all kinds of interesting new things. And then also just from a design perspective, you see all these interesting challenges. You talk about new types of experiences we couldn't build before. That's it exactly from my perspective, right? And what are the new tools that, whether you're creating a game or or telling a story or something yet to be imagined, what are the new things yet for us to discover? I'm kind of curious, what do you guys most expect will be sort of the new techniques that maybe, especially with the influx of creators over this year, that we might become the foundation for VR in the future?
I can answer that by saying what sold me on virtual reality. I think it was when I first saw the second development kit that we made at Oculus, that I was able to move around in the space, that I had the ability to look and move in the space. And then while we were developing Lost and Henry, touch came along. The ability to have your hands in the space was transformative. And so I think that more ways to take what we do on a daily basis and bring that as input into an experience is what, I think that's why virtual reality is a new medium, is because the abstraction barrier between you as a user giving the real-time engine input is what you do on a daily basis. So, we have I think having your hands and knowing where your head is at is amazing. I think that is a great foundation. But eventually we're going to start seeing games where you're going to need your hips in there, where you're going to be dodging bullets or dancing. You're going to need to see your feet in there so you can see as you're touching the edge of a cliff.
Well, and some fantastic research at Oculus around biometrics and capturing facial reactions and being able to translate that into VR, yeah, absolutely. What other ideas?
I think it's fun that we're still at a phase in this industry right now where you can make things 10 times better or 50 times better. Like just the difference in improving the ergonomics of the controllers you're using in your hand to sense it. Like when those ergonomics get better, it might have the same number of buttons on there, it might be the same input, roughly the same input device, but as the ergonomics have gotten better in the latest prototypes that are coming out, like that is can be a 10 times improvement, right? And I mean, some of you have, I'm sure many of you have built these experiences, and to me, like going from 89 frames a second, where you're mostly hitting frame rate, and 90 frames a second, that's like a 10 or a 20 times improvement in the quality of the immersion and quality of the experience. And there's a bunch of 10 times betters still out there that any one of us in this room, many of us in this room are going to discover this year as we build these things. And those are the things where you're just like, okay, yeah, this is what this is about. And then a month later, oh, now this is where we can go next. I think that's one of the things that excites me about getting to experiment in this space.
And you know, there's this really great sort of marriage of creative and technology that is really going to drive this forward, and they kind of have to go hand in hand. And you know, we talk about it a lot in virtual reality, but the history of film was driven by these huge creative leaps combined with these huge technological leaps, you know, just the invention of the camera. And then it became, like a lot of VR is today, you know, almost, at least outside of the gaming world, a lot of it is sort of documenting reality. But then the artists got a hold of things and started figuring out other ways that they could use cinema to achieve other kinds of effects. And you know, a lot of the shots were static because the camera weighed a ton, practically literally, and you couldn't move the camera. And then sound was incredibly difficult and lots of resistance because the cameras were so loud that, you know, just to baffle them so they didn't make noise, it was an incredible technical challenge, and on and on. And so, you know, in VR, I sort of look forward to the same kind of progression. And for me personally, finding that equation between cinema and VR, not that would be the same kind of experience, but it would deliver that same kind of empathetic experience that you can get in a film. There's a lot of talk about empathy in VR, but I actually think that it's a lot more difficult to achieve for the very reason that it is VR, for the very reason that you are there. The same way it's difficult to find empathy a lot of times for us in our real lives, you know? If somebody breaks down in tears next to us, you don't immediately go, oh, I just feel so sorry for you, Max. Instead, it's like, oh, there, Max. You know, it's uncomfortable for us because we bring our own ego to the equation. And so by inviting the audience to sort of come into the story, you actually raise the level of complexity and I think make some of the things that make the cinematic experience so great, even more difficult to achieve. So that's a big thing for me. I want to really try to find what that is.
We were talking before the panel began, and you mentioned that you feel like you're as much of a director as a magician right now. And early filmmakers back in the 1900s were magicians because the technology was so, you know, any technology, or I forget what the saying is, but any technology that's indiscernible from magic. From magic.
Yeah.
Or
sorry, Arthur C. Clarke, we totally botched that.
Yeah, but I think that's where cinema began, is that it was technologists who loved the magic of it, loved the awe and the wow, and I think cinema has always had that. I want to wow my audience, and I think right now, thinking like a magician is where virtual reality needs to be.
Well, and to go back to the film, like from me, I always appreciate how, you know, the famous or infamous directors kind of brought their own style. Like James Cameron, to me, was always the technology pioneer, right? Obviously, like Avatar and leaping forward and moving the industry. Did he make the most dramatic movie, tearjerker ever? No, but that's okay. He created tools that other people then could leverage to push even farther on that genre and so on. And I feel like that's exactly what's happening with VR. Is we have so many people with hugely varied backgrounds, but amazing expertise and techniques that they're all piling into VR, and we're all sharing these sort of things together. And the other thing I would say on this is, you know, we've all been in this pretty early. You know, when we have panels initially, it was like cautioning, don't move the camera, performance is key, but we're beyond that now, I feel like, you know, and now it's much more of like, how do you make it emotional? How do you keep presence? When you have hands in there, how do you actually use them effectively in intuitive ways, right? I am kind of curious to change it up a little bit here. You know, in this year, you know, we're going to have games, we have storytelling, but does anybody have a good read on what the killer app of VR is that's really going to take it much, much further? Maybe not this year, but in the next few years.
I have an answer to that. I think I'm biased because I'm a Facebook employee. But that aside, I think social is incredibly powerful in virtual reality. The toy box experience that we made at Oculus, where you're just there in a physics engine, essentially, and you're just throwing stuff at someone. And I can get into toy box, and all I'm seeing is a mannequin head that is moving like the avatar, and where their hands are. And I think we could do something where they would put someone in the studio in there, and I wouldn't know who it is, and just by that gesture alone, without talking, I would know who that person is. I can read that body language.
Yeah, I would agree with that. What we're finding is that even in the simplest case of putting on a rotational system like the Gear VR, where your only agency is effectively looking around, you're choosing which direction you're looking at, there's already an increased sense of immersion. The minute you add controller input, there's a presence multiplier that happens because now you can see your hands. And then the minute you can actually see somebody else in VR, it multiplies it even further. You're that much more pulled in and feeling like you're present in this other space. So I would tend to agree that once you incorporate social, that becomes a whole other.
And I think social is huge. I think another one is, I mean, for those of you who've played with Tilt Brush or anything similar to like that, like Medium, like creation tools in VR, and actually like what Unreal Engine just demonstrated this morning with actually working in VR to create things, those experiences, like the experience of actually making things in a virtual space does something different for the kind of things you create. It does something different for the way you think about and remember that experience and interact with the experience. So you can imagine it's not going to be too long before we're spending more time in the spaces that we're working on while we're building them collaboratively. And that may not be this year, to your point, but I think it's clear we're headed that direction.
Yeah, and I would say from the game development side, social multiplayer, like cooperative play specifically, can save your butt. In Gears of War, we actually had that moment early on because, you know, shit hits the fan, you don't have enough time for anything, you're like, should we cut multiplayer, should we cut co-op? And thank God we didn't, because it, you know, so many of the stories and so many people having those memories, those connections with people, even cross-country, that was the way they stayed in touch, was to fire up a game and have that shared experience. And it becomes that much more powerful, obviously, when we bring that into VR, and Toybox is definitely one of the ones that stands out. And the other one, interesting, you know, we talk about is Minecraft, right? By all accounts, Minecraft should not exist, right? Like, it would be the success that it has been because, you know, it doesn't have all the checklist of super fancy rendering and all that kind of stuff. Yet, fundamentally, it's a fun experience, and it's a fun experience that can be shared, right? And taking that in that's sort of the inspiration for a lot of us back at Epic Games on things like taking the Unreal Engine, you know, allowing you to create your VR in VR. It seems like we have to figure this stuff out, especially if we are going to build the Matrix or the holodeck or whatever you want to call it. You're not going to pop out to tweak your avatar and then pop back in, right? We're going to be able to exist in there, which, you know, may be scary, but we'll see.
I also look forward to when we can go into an experience with our friends, and then there's actors on the other NPCs. So, you know, there's going to be the experiences out there where you have artificial intelligence, but I think it's going to be those experiences where you go to a murder mystery dinner and 3 of the people there are totally in on it and acting, and they're great role players, and they help your friends be great role players. I think that'll be awesome.
No, that's a great topic, actually. I mean, we're seeing a lot of companies, a lot of teams push forward with live performance capture and bring that into VR. I'm curious, where do you guys see that actually going?
We're doing similar experiments right now for both VR and AR, where we actually take somebody live from the motion capture stage and port them, whether it's just, you know, up a floor from the motion capture stage into this, we have this living room lab that we build these tests in. And the idea of having a virtual character walk around in your living room, whether that's simulating VR or simulating AR, where they can actually be in your space with you, when you have a live actor doing it, there's just nothing that compares to that. And eventually, maybe AI will be able to play some of these roles, but that's probably a few years into the future, or maybe a lot of years in the future. And that doesn't mean we can't come up with ways to do this now, right? There's a lot of opportunities to have those sort of interactive experiences today, and we're, even in our very rough prototypes, it's extremely compelling to interact with a virtual character, especially when they're acted by a human.
Yeah, that's a really interesting sort of challenge, and there's also seems to be a split in the development path where we just announced today we did a project with Lionsgate based on the Allegiant movie, which is coming out in a couple of weeks, and and in that experience we took the actual captures of the real actors that were used in the movie, the CG characters, and then we did a performance capture, did a PCAP, and you're now sort of in a room scale experience interacting with these characters. And on the one hand, it's like, wow, okay, you feel closer to these characters than you ever have before. But because you're in VR, there's this sort of inherent desire to want to interact. And when the characters don't respond, it's a problem. So figuring out how to effectively blend kind of realistic performances that you expect in association with human characters that then also have a sufficient level of AI fidelity to respond is one of the challenges.
I'd actually like to know, because I think you have more experience in this space, one of the things I'm excited is to see depth-based capture of live action. So I think, you know, photogrammetry right now is great if it's a set, if it's static. But I think that being able to capture deep data and project that onto real mesh data in a real-time engine is the way to go to create photoreal experiences and to get over the uncanny valley, I think that will be huge. I think that's groundbreaking. I'd love to know where you think that's going.
I think, so there's a whole bunch of interesting research going on around, I guess, what's called volumetric capture, where you're effectively using different techniques to capture video, but it's volumetric in the sense that you can walk around it and look around it. At least as far as I know, all of that, in that scenario, you're capturing an actual performance, and you're not rigging that character, and you're not applying additional procedural animation or AI on top of that. And so there's a sort of a choice there that you're making creatively. Do you want CG renders of characters that have a true likeness to humans, or are you more interested in perhaps reducing the fidelity of the characters you're interacting with and increasing the AI fidelity so that your AI fidelity is higher than your visual fidelity? There's a whole bunch of stuff to work through there. We certainly don't have a crystal ball, but I think our approach is do a couple of experiments, kind of try stuff early, and kind of see where it goes.
It's interesting. I mean, it's one of the big advantages I guess I have doing character animated work that's all about exaggeration. I remember Carl Rosendahl, who was the founder of Pacific Data Images back in the early 80s. We got a job to do a 3D Daffy Duck for Disney, for one of their theme parks, Disneyland maybe. And they wanted to use motion capture at the time because that was the hot new thing. And Carl said, well, we'd love to do motion capture, but we don't know a duck that can act. So that's the wonderful thing. Animation is all about exaggeration, and you can be, really broad and expressive and super communicative and really, really let the viewer know what's going on inside, this character's head. And yet we're free of this burden, which is a respectable challenge to try to achieve, but this burden of trying to get this fidelity and this sort of realism, and we all know about the uncanny valley. So I'm just so glad that I don't have to worry about that.
Well, yeah, speaking on bringing reality into virtual reality, I mean, it's something we've been chasing that photorealistic image in real time, but when it comes to VR, I'm also asking myself, wow, I can build anything. Why would I build the boring reality I'm trying to escape, right? So I'm kind of curious, there are obviously some really amazing applications of it, but fast forward 5 years to now, do you think we're going to be still borrowing from reality photogrammetry, live performance capture?
Right now, I love computer animation because that's my history as well, but I also think that one of the reasons it's great in virtual reality is because of the technical limitations, right? I think it's really hard. The uncanny valley is that much more difficult in virtual reality, so trying to make something photoreal, I'd rather go towards gestural because I know that's appealing. But I do feel like, that to expand this medium because I think a lot of people are seeing the animated stuff and they think oh, this is going to be for kids, or this is going to be, everyone's saying oh, it's just another Pixar in VR. But I think if we are going after a billion-person art form, there's a lot of people with a lot of different tastes out there. And so I think photoreal is definitely something that is going to be part of virtual reality.
Yeah, so it's another tool in the box. You don't necessarily have to use it, but it is there. And I definitely agree, the striving for photorealism crossing the uncanny valley just pushes the tech so much.
I think there's different stories you can tell if you can fool some people into thinking that it's real. And we have a demo that's a couple of years old, an experiment we did that we call the interactive cinema demonstration, and maybe some of you have seen it. We show some droids and some stormtroopers walking around on Tatooine, and you watch it on an iPad, and you can watch the linear story, and then you can kind of explore it. And for this audience who knows a lot about real-time graphics, you'd probably know in the first 10 or 15 seconds that that's all CG. For people who, maybe 80% of the audience who don't look at a lot of computer-generated images all the time, until we pause it and grab the camera and move around, they don't always know that they're looking at a CG image. And the moment you say, okay, that was a short film you just watched, let me pause it, and you have an iPad, and let me pause it and drag around the screen, and they're like, wait, what am I looking at? and then you watch the scene again from a different angle, or you go explore something that wasn't found in the original, that wasn't on camera in the original cut of the sequence, and you just see people's minds are blown. And it's in part because everybody loves a magic trick, right? You love to be fooled. And I think there's opportunities to trick your mind with things that are photorealistic, that are different opportunities than you can in a stylized world. And both are totally viable, right? You'd have different opportunities for storytelling in both levels of fidelity.
Well, one thing I love about that demo is that you don't see faces, right? I think
It's
that
carefully designed.
Yeah, no, it's a great
Stormtroopers and droids are great for CG humans.
Most of our brain is dedicated to parsing faces, right? So I think we believe sets photogrammetry, but if you're less than a millimeter off in terms of a smile, people know it's fake. So put helmets on. Right?
Leave room for imagination for the brain to do its thing, because we find it all the time that we want to believe. We want to believe what we're seeing and experiencing is real. When we were making Bullet Train for Oculus Connect last year on Oculus touch controllers, initially we started with full physics control with the weapons, right? So what you could do is you could take the shotgun in hand and you go clink it against a table, and just the audio cue, the visual cue, a little bit of haptic feedback made me believe I was holding a real shotgun touching that table, right? And I think lots of other developers, the Servius guys were saying similar, they have a sword fighting thing, and people would stop. They don't have to, they just, there's nothing physically there, but their brain was just so convinced in the moment that it was real. And definitely that becomes an amazing tool. I can't replicate anything like that on a little 2D screen anymore, right? It's a whole new era of what we could build, right?
It's interesting because when we first started making our experiences, we were worried that people wouldn't follow the story. Because if you give them, we're used to saying the director shows you exactly what you want you to see for this 3 seconds, this 2 seconds. And it turns out that most people want to play along. That
Yeah, a lot of times people say, I was really stressed out because I wasn't sure where I was supposed to look.
Yeah.
I said, well, you can look wherever you want.
Yeah.
But people feel like they have to follow the structure.
I do feel like that's part of learning how to be good at virtual reality, is to make it feel natural, that people were just like, this was interesting, I was following it, and I got readability of the story. So the first time someone goes through it, they don't have this feeling of, oh, am I doing it wrong or what? It's through the second time that you're like, the story now, then explore the space.
And I think for me, as a VR maker, that's often a clue that I'm doing something wrong. Because what you want to do is offer clues, even if they're subconscious clues, to the viewer so that they feel inspired to look a certain way, and when they do, they get rewarded for it. And they feel like they're making these choices, and everything's falling into place, and they don't start to think about, a maker or a creator behind it, and wondering, well, what do they want me to do? Which is always an experience that drives me crazy in a game where, I think I've done everything I'm supposed to do, and that door isn't opening yet, and it takes me out of the scene, and I start to think, well, what did the maker of this game want me to do now that I'm not doing?
No, it's a terrible problem, right? We call it guessing the designer's brain. Yeah. And honestly, I think we've gotten a bit lazy on the game side of things. Very beginning, Mario, there was no tutorial, no explanation, but you kind of figured it out, and the game taught you itself by playing it. Nowadays, and I'm guilty of this as well, we put giant HUDs and text, go here, click that button, do that, right, in fear that people won't figure it out. And I love that sentiment. It feels like one of the we have discovered rules of VR is anytime you try to force the player to do anything, it's going to break that immersion, right? The whole thing is they are the person. They have presence. They are controlling this experience, and we're there just building the world around them.
This great example I can think of from my own experience is that in the Invasion short, which we're doing, the spaceship appears and flies around and then goes behind a stand of trees. And I thought, oh, this is a time for me to use this spatialized audio and just really build up the dramatic tension and have the ship behind these trees and hear the engines getting louder as it's presumably getting closer and closer. Here it comes, and it's spatialized audio. It's coming from right over there, right behind those trees. But after about 2 seconds, the audience 80% of the viewers started going, where is it? Where's the spaceship? And most of them were all looking back here as the spaceship came over the trees. Even though, I had the audio cues there and everything. And so the solution was to cut those 2 seconds out and say, this is not the kind of dramatic tension that's going to work, because the viewer's going to start trying to second guess, what I'm choosing to do. And it just kicked everybody out.
And unfortunately, you lose that tool from telling a story, but we're going to give you new ones, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so maybe kind of a slightly different topic now then. We're all developers, we're all makers in VR, and we've been doing it a while, as long as you can in this new generation. But as a eventual consumer of VR, what are you guys most looking forward to over the coming years when you go home and you're not working to the wee hours in the morning?
It actually, maybe this is going to lead to another topic, but I love games. I've been playing games all my life as well as making film, and I am going to be playing games in virtual reality to begin with. And I am hopefully going to be inspired by other VR makers out there. I think right now I want to get better at my art form, and to do that, I need to see other content. I think art only gets better by everyone stealing from each other and adding little ideas. So I am very excited to see all of the story-based content, but I'm also going to be playing games too. And I'm going to be stealing from those games into my story experiences. And eventually, I think, right now we're saying that we are story makers in VR. We are not game makers in VR. But I think that there's going to be this gray area. I don't mind if eventually people are like, is Story Studio making a game? Maybe.
So we put out Trials of Tatooine, just this morning, and you played at the show, and people are like, is this a game? And we're like, no, it's not a game. Like, we're not keeping score, but it does use a ton of game mechanics, and holding a lightsaber and deflecting blaster bolts is absolutely a game mechanic. I was really happy as we started showing it to people when people said they felt like they got told a story in VR, and it's a very simple story. But they said, that was one of the early stories that we're feeling in VR, but we're using game mechanics, and I think the idea of what VR will be a combination of, film language, some of the elements will work and apply in VR, and game design and game mechanics that work great in games and will apply to VR, some of them will apply. And then there's some new things that we haven't yet discovered, things from theater and things from other kinds of immersive experiences that we already know and love that need to be borrowed. And then, of course, there's going to be some language to VR that we have to discover that is just native to VR that we're not actually borrowing from another medium.
Yeah, as a consumer, I think I'm looking forward to kind of the spectrum of VR experiences. I love spending time, in a deeply interactive experience, such as Tilt Brush. Could spend a whole bunch of time there, and then wanting to sort of lean back and perhaps put my gear on or even cardboard and watch a bunch of 360 videos and then go back in. Sort of my measure is at what point am I going to be spending an hour of my day every day in VR? And it's still very cumbersome and awkward and difficult right now because if you're going to a PC-based headset or you've got you're figuring stuff out and downloading stuff, or if you're trying stuff on the gear, it's also complicated to find where experiences are. So I'm just really looking forward to the whole sort of ecosystem evolving to the point where for the consumer, it becomes super easy to just chill out for an hour a day with a glass of wine or whatever and being in VR.
Yeah, I agree.
Wine, not.
Yeah, maybe beer or.
It's all, I agree, despite my own particular focus. I mean, I love games, I love anything. I love the documentary stuff that's being done. It's so incredibly compelling to just be somewhere you could never ever be and just look and see what the floor is made of. I mean, it's really exciting. I mean, what I hope, I don't know how to do this, but and nobody I think does right now, but I really hope what we could magically solve sooner than later is the ability to move the VR camera without making the person who's not moving feel uncomfortable. That to me is like such a holy grail, and some of it's hard coded into our DNA and our biology. But and I beg people not to create content that's going to make the majority of the audience sick. But at the same time, oh man, if we could do that.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I definitely echo the sentiment of making it just plug and play, right? Because that's been the real bane. I'm sure everybody in this room has felt it of fresh headset, fresh computer, doesn't work. Oh God, what do I do, right? And hopefully, with Sony with the PlayStation 4, I imagine that's going to be probably an initial lead in this generation just because it is a closed ecosystem and they can control the knobs and drivers and all that fun stuff. But yeah, I totally agree. I think I'm a lifetime gamer as well. I can't imagine VR not having amazing games. And I remember times way too much time. Like World of Warcraft, for example. How much of my life did I devote to that damn thing, even though it was like primitive in comparison of, but what is going to be that in VR? What's going to be that Fallout or whatever your poison is that you for the first time really can lose yourself in that experience?
It's kind of interesting when I see a screenshot of, what's the name of the touch demo with the
Toy box?
Toy Box. When I see a screenshot of Toy Box, I actually look at that and I'm like, no, the version I tried, it looked better than that.
It was so much cooler.
It was so much cooler. And I'm like, I have to remind myself every time, I was like, oh, that's because I bought in. Like, I was playing in there, and I forgot. And I do computer graphics for a living, right? I pay attention to this stuff. I forgot to pay attention to the fidelity of the graphics because I was like, that guy's talking to me, and I'm throwing a firecracker at his face. And that's always going to be fun. So well, and not in real life, of course, just in virtual reality.
Even more fun in real life.
Even more fun in real life. So there you go. So, yeah, it's really interesting to see what are the Warcraft or the Minecraft kind of things, or what are the places you're going to be able to use high fidelity to play a trick or tell somebody a different kind of story that you can only do at that fidelity.
I actually think Minecraft will be the Minecraft of VR. I think it's a great idea. You're right. You forgive fidelity because I think it goes back to that original question of when are we going to get to photoreal? Are we going to want that? We already know we have, or right now there's something on our face. We know we're in virtual reality. It's pixelated. Right now we're tethered. Like we're not tricking ourselves into thinking we're somewhere else. So why would I want to put all this stuff on to experience the real world? Let me go to some place where I can just build something out of blocks, where I can do virtual Legos and build a skyscraper really tall. I don't care if they actually look pretty crappy and pixelated. I can't do that in the real life, and I'm getting feedback as if this is real life. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I was like, just make me a wizard, right? You know, and like whether it's games or films or reading a book, it's for a long, long time we've been trying to escape the limits of reality and being human beings. And yeah, I totally agree. Like, I can't wait to see Minecraft fully realized in VR. I mean, I imagine it's basically there now. All right, so I guess we're getting close. I want to save a little bit of time for questions. We've got 2 mics out here for everyone. If you can just queue up, and we'll take a few. Oh, there you go.
Hi there. Oh. Hi, I just want to say thank you very much for having this talk. This has been a lot of fun to listen to. But one of the questions I've had as I wanted to get into VR and start working on my own little prototypes and all of that is I've noticed that with certain games, you've got like Elite Dangerous and a lot of these games that are already set up, the player is already stuck in a chair and you kind of don't want to take them out of that. But then if you look at Valve's headset and the way that they have a giant open box, you kind of don't want to put a chair into it. Have you guys had any struggles trying to put peripherals of any kind, even as simple as a chair or a stool, into that environment and letting the players still play?
Yeah, actually, one of the experiences we created is the blue encounter, where this giant whale swims into your space, and we initially targeted the Vive. So there's an element of the experience where you can walk out to the edge of your room scale space and look over the bow of the ship, and so if you do have the affordance of a room scale space to walk around in, then there's some value to you as the player. But if you sit in a chair, and we've done this a lot, and we've had people who feel more comfortable seated, and so it's a swivel chair right in the middle of the space, and you can enjoy the experience equally well. So there's a lot of, we're thinking through that a lot, because different headsets have different degrees of range of motion, and so thinking through that. But we do think there's a way you can sort of thread that so that you can have a seated experience that could also work if you're standing and moving around and extending a little bit further.
I would say like one of the most compelling 360 video experiences I've had. I've forgotten the name, unfortunately, but they put you in one of the animatronic chairs, and you're in the car with Jack Black. I think it's the Goosebumps VR experience or something like that. And you know, he's whipping the car around, and things are breaking. And because I knew I was sitting in this chair before I put the headset on, and then it started doing all the things my brain expected, I was like, I'm done. This is amazing. Even though it was a 360 video and not necessarily the most high fidelity thing, it didn't matter. It was the most entertaining thing I saw that show. You know.
The one thing we did try that was very successful is we put, for Henry, most of the experience here in his home, and we designed a virtual rug around you. And when we premiered Henry, we tried to get a rug that was about the same size that you would sit down on because we wanted people to feel very comfortable in Henry. And so sitting down, not feeling like you're having to walk around and navigate, was very appealing for people. And the fact that when they touched and felt this really plush, nice carpet, they loved it. And also we said, you know, when you're feeling yourself getting off the carpet, as people would be on their knees and hands and walking around, when they hit the edge of the rug, they're like, okay, this is the edge of the director's intent. And that worked very well. But you can't trip over a rug as easily. So that was at least successful.
But when you align the real world in any way to VR and you get that haptics, whether it's something that you're holding and you're getting a little bit of feedback, or even better, something in the room, if you know where the chair is and you can have the chair be where it's supposed to be, like that is one of those huge multipliers. Haptics are just a superpower in terms of putting you in an immersive VR space.
Yeah, if you ever have a chance to go see The Void, which is, it's just amazing. They have this room that you move through, and you're wearing the gear, and you see a flaming torch, and you reach out and you grab it, and you have it in your hand, and you carry it with you down these long hallways, and you touch the wall wherever you go, and it's really, really astonishing.
All right, cool. Can we take another question over here?
Yeah, hi. I'm a student, and I'm learning VR. And whenever I want to make some experience in VR, I'm stuck at two things. Either I want to make it gameplay heavy or story heavy. And I want to know how to find a balance between these two, and how to implement something which is like balance of both and equally immersive.
I want to know that too.
I think you may discover it as soon as any of us.
This is a hard problem right now. When we made Lost in Henry, we applied a lot of our story process, the production pipeline, in terms of do development, pre-production, pre-viz into production. And on both Lost and Henry, we added interactivity late. And we found with both of them that, crap, we really should have thought of this from the beginning, because we're now making decisions in interactivity that are affecting story. So I don't think we have an answer, but at least right now, what we're thinking is develop enough. What is the world? What's the character? What are the bones of the story? So you have inspiration for your gameplay programmer, and then do a bunch of prototypes.
Yeah, iteration is king by all means. And one thing we found with in building Bullet Train, it's very much a game heavy. Is there any story in there? You're a badass. You get to shoot things. It's a great story though. And we kept saying, in our demo that we put together, it feels very gamey, and yet you're invulnerable. You don't die. And they're like, oh, you got to have health. You have to have score. You have to have all these things because games have that. And I'm like, but why, right? I don't care. Just make me awesome, and then don't stop. Give me more awesome tools to play with. And I would definitely encourage that. It's just go with your gut. Do stuff. Try stuff. And don't be afraid of failure, because some things will be terrible. That's okay, but you learn from that, right?
And iteration is great, and also testing with people that don't have any experience, because the more you watch it yourself, you're going to get familiar with it, and you're not going to be able to respond the way a brand new audience member might respond.
Awesome. All right, we'll take another question from here.
Yeah, a question about room scale. So for people that are developing room scale experiences, I pre-ordered the Vive, and last week I kind of had a tense conversation with the wife about what happens to our dining room, right? And I'm in New Orleans, where it's not that expensive. Now, San Francisco, I haven't met a lot of independent developers here that have a room to spare, right? I mean, it's on a practical level. What do you say to people that want to create those experiences, and how do they judge the market for them? How many people are going to have this?
Well, nobody can judge the market probably this first year.
Well, did you see Chet? He published numbers at a conference. Did you guys see his slide? It was super awesome. And Chet is the guy at Valve who knows this stuff. And he put up a slide, which is great. He said, I'm going to show you our actual projections. And he put up a slide, and it just had RAND. It said, adoption equals RAND from 1 to 10 million. He's like, this year, I guarantee you, that's how many headsets we will sell. And I love the fact that he could get up on stage and pull that off. But I think the answer is, especially for Roomscale VR, nobody knows. It doesn't feel like a lot of people are going to be willing to give up their living rooms this year to give you the 12 foot by 12 foot.
Right.
But it doesn't mean there's not amazing opportunities, maybe even some amazing commercial opportunities this year for a great room scale experience that can have a certain kind of
But it's a good question for us as content makers because we're having this debate right now. The Oculus cameras, especially when you have two of them, covers a lot of a range and has similar problems to the Vive's Roomscale. And so now we're thinking, all right, we need to design the experience so that it will play really great when you have the perfect setup. But we also need to think of a way so that someone could be sitting down and still explore a space.
Right.
And it's difficult because the director's like, I want the person to walk over and lean down and get surprised by this moment. And that's not going to be as effective if they do it just in a chair. But can you design, it's almost like you have to design two versions and ask the user which one are you set up for?
Well, because I also go into the practicality is like, usually at the end of the day when I have time to play a game, I'm exhausted, right? So as much as like creating standing, interactive, moving around is a lot of fun, do people actually want that sustained? Yeah, and so I think as a developer, is initially until maybe there's one clear solution to all these things, you've just got to accommodate as much as you can.
If it's any consolation, AR is going to be a lot harder because you're going to have to take into account everyone's different configuration where they might want to, if it's playing or experience a story.
Right.
So if you have to have a character interact with whatever your environment is, then it's no longer a matrix of like how big of a play space do you have. Now it's a matrix of what is in the room, and am I going to be able to build that dynamically and have all of my world interact with that? That's
that's definitely. There's some interesting challenges. I've seen some prototypes for AR gaming where they build like a Mario-style platformer using your coffee table and your couch. And as a designer, how the hell do you balance that, right? It's like, because normally it's about distance and velocities and jump heights and all that stuff. Nope, you got to find a whole new set of ways to make that challenging yet fun and always solvable. It's going to be interesting times. All right, I think we have time for one last question over here.
All right, so I guess this actually plays a little bit into what you've just spoken about. But when you think about sort of the two main, I guess, VR headsets that are currently in people's minds, the Oculus and the HTC Vive, they sort of seem to be very much focused on different kinds of design goals in terms of their experience, and that the Vive is something where you're more designed to walk around and explore in a bigger room size scale, whereas the Oculus is a little more like contained. And I'm wondering, is that something that we're going to have to start thinking of more, I'm going to use the word genres, even though that may not be correct, but thinking as like two different kinds of genres that we have to think about of designing like something where you need to walk around in, and focusing on making an experience that's about that, or focusing on an experience where you just need to sort of be in one little small space, or do we need to make sort of like two different versions? And what is the kind of thing we can start thinking about, like overlapping, where the Vive is very much centered around using real-world motion to be how you move around, whereas in the Oculus, I think it's becoming a common technique to like sit you down, but move you like physically in the world.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think developers are going to have to make some real choices. You know, one approach is to sort of take a lowest common denominator approach, where if your goal is to reach as broad an audience as possible, and you want to make sure that your experience, pretty much the same experience, the same investment in your creative execution is going to result in one product that sells on the PS4 VR, on the Rift, and on the Vive, then you're going to make certain design choices where you make sure that you can pretty much, even if you do have a Vive, you could be seated and having that experience. So that's kind of one line of thinking that we're seeing a lot of the creators and designers we work with, they're really optimizing for that. In other instances, you really want to lean in on one specific platform and take advantage of exactly what that platform delivers in the best possible way, to the exclusion of the others. So I think there's some real choices which impacts economics and your investment, and it's a question that everybody's facing. All developers are facing that.
Yeah, and this is not new. Every industry, games, films, has had to tackle these. And I would just encourage you to not try to be binary, right? Don't just say I'm this or that. Explore. Some things will naturally fit to multiple devices and experiences, and some won't, and that's okay.
One of the things that we're doing at Baobab is really putting story and narrative and character at the top, so that everything else supports that. It's not like here's a bunch of great VR ideas that we'd like to try, and let's see if we can come up with a story that we can sort of package them inside of. And I'm not saying that's not a valid way to go, but it gives us kind of an advantage because the best stories are kind of medium independent. Like if I couldn't tell you the story of one of our VR projects and have you go, wow, that's a great story, then we won't make it. But if it's a great story, then for me, the medium then becomes a one way to deliver it. So, you know, we can deliver, if it's a great story, I firmly believe we can deliver it with the Vive and take advantage of everything the Vive has to offer. We can deliver it on a Gear VR or a Google Cardboard or in a book or on stage or anywhere.
Sure
and that's
is.
why the best stories, you know, survive for generations and centuries.
All right. Well, I think that wraps us up today. I want to thank you all for coming. I want to thank the panelists for joining me today. Hope you have a good day. Thank you.